Well, I volunteered for Vietnam because my first wife wanted me to resign. And I had a chance to go to Fort Meade, Maryland for an intelligence assignment, and I would have been able to get out of the war, because when that assignment was over, I had my 5-year commitment from the military, and I could go off scot-free. And but I felt that if I ever avoided Vietnam, that I would feel guilty the rest of my life, because that was the defining moment of my class of '63 at West Point, all going to war. And so I volunteered without telling her. And it was a big mistake. It took 25 years for her to forgive me, and it was a spiritual story related to that forgiveness. So I volunteered for Vietnam and was assigned as a prisoner interrogator with a military intelligence detachment.
What was your rank and where did you serve?
Yeah, I was a captain just 2 months before I went to Vietnam. Originally served in a unit in Nha Trang, and one of those amazing happenings in life, I'm on a plane from Saigon to Nha Trang one time with a lieutenant colonel who was the Special Forces man in charge of the Central Highlands area. So I'm talking to him, I'm saying, I'm bored silly because there's no prisoners to interrogate. And he said, well, I'll give you a job. I was airborne qualified, so I could transfer, get jump pay and everything. He said, I'll give you a job that'll keep you busy and you won't be bored. I said, what is it? He said, be an S2 at a B team, which is like a battalion. I don't know what they have it today in Special Forces. Anyway, I said, well, what the heck? So I go back to my unit, and within 1 week I was transferred. I was in Nha Trang, just go across the airfield to Special Forces, and got assigned to Special Forces. And I was there about a week, waiting for my orders to go up country, as they call it, to Central Highlands, to take that assignment, and nothing's happening. So I go see this sergeant, E8, and I said, what's going on in personnel? He said, well, we've changed your assignment. I said, well, thanks for telling me. I said, what is it? He said, can't tell you. I said, why not? He said, because it's secret. And we put your file in a safe over here. I said, well, I still can't find out. So I finally got hold of a major that was a West Point grad at one of the camps. And I said, what's my assignment? He told me, he says, espionage against Cambodia. So I figured, well, wearing tuxedos, going to the embassies, trying to pick up information. It wasn't that. It wasn't that. It was a little hotter than that. I thought I could be a James Bond type, and go sip martinis at embassies. It's like...
Wow. Okay, so you've answered some of these questions already. So why don't you expound a little bit on why you decided to join, why you volunteered to join?
Through the military? Mm-hmm. Well, I was
And why the Army?
Yeah, my dad was an Army officer, and we were stationed in Japan. He was stationed in Japan. So I was in Japan for 3 years as a brat. We call it brats. And all good Army brats collect patches, so I collected patches. And 8 years old, I found the West Point patch, Military Academy at West Point. So I asked my dad about it. He said, yeah, that's West Point up in New York. And I said, well, what do they do there? He says, they train officers. And so he started pointing out the men in his unit, and that we knew in our circles were West Point grads. So they were all, young officers, sharp officers, and everything. I said, well, age 8, man, I said, I'm gonna go to West Point. I'm gonna become an officer in the Army. What the heck? So I focused, and I believe it's very important to focus early on goals. And when I give talks at schools, I tell them, this is a lesson. Focus early on what you want to do. You may change, but give yourself something you work toward. So I studied hard, stayed out of trouble, and got admitted. I went in after 11th grade in high school. Got admitted to the academy. Youngest man in my class. 740 cadets. I was the youngest guy. Ran scared. I was so immature. I wasn't even shaven yet.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Oh my gosh. You could only do that stuff these days. So many protocols now. Do you recall your first day in service? And tell me about your boot camp.
Well, it's Beast Barracks at West Point. And by the end of the day at 5 o'clock, you are fitted in a uniform the first day. You're admitted. It's the first week in July every year. And it's they have you on the plane at West Point, at Trophy Point they call it, all of us being sworn in as cadets to serve our country. And it was just a maddening day. I mean, you go here, you go there, you have a duffel bag, you get part of the uniform here, you got your military equipment here, blah, blah, blah. Bring it back to your room. And my first day was a little scary because I brought back one duffel bag full of stuff to the wrong room. It took me 2 hours. I said, where's this duffel bag? So I realized that we have what they call barracks. You go in this and it's 4 floors and rooms on each side. I'd gone to this one over here, to the same room over on this side, one of the trips. So I go blasting into that room, don't say a word to my classmates in the room, grab my duffel bag I'd put in there by mistake. They hadn't even noticed an extra one in the room. Took it back to my room. So it was a horrible first day.
Oh my gosh.
Things got better.
What is training experience like? I served as an enlisted guy, so I don't know this stuff.
Well, basically, Beast Barracks is kind of like basic training. I mean, we have rifle, marksmanship classes, and we go out in the field, and we had exercises in the field. We went out to this lake nearby and camped out and had a hike, and do this and do that. And it's mainly cadet discipline and learning the traditions of West Point and serving your country. And it's very motivating. We had a speaker that Beast Barracks that was in 59 when I went in. He was Pete Dawkins, who had been Heisman Trophy winner the year before and the first captain of the Cadet Corps. I mean, you talk about somebody that was motivating about who we were and what he was and what he meant to the academy and so forth. That was an incredible brand new grad to come back and after he graduated in 59 to come back in the summer and give us a motivational talk. It was incredible. We were all fired up, man. We had a great football team the year before.
So getting into the military, going overseas, tell me a couple of your most memorable experiences. Funny.
There wasn't a whole lot funny in Vietnam. To get into this clandestine unit, I got in civilian clothes. There was a major, Curtis Terry, who's now deceased, but there'd been an uprising in the Montagnard area in the Central Highlands the year before I got there. And Curtis Terry was the Special Forces officer that basically put down the rebellion up there in the mountains. So he had quite a name for himself. And so he came in and he said, I want you to learn your way around Saigon. And so we had a safe house that we lived in. It was rented. He said, I want you to learn your way around Saigon. He said, how you want me to do that? He said, well, we've got this car outside, this local driver takes us everywhere we want to go. We don't have regular military jeeps or anything. So I got in the back seat of the car with a map of Saigon, and for 2 days, 8 hours a day, 16 hours total, I went all around Saigon. I learned all the major streets, Cholan, which was a Chinese area of Saigon, South Saigon. And this driver must have said, I've got a crazy guy in the back seat. And we go down the same streets and we do this, we do that. He says, turn left, turn right. And but I learned my way around Saigon. And before I did it, I said, why should I do that? He said, well, if you ever get mugged in the street, in an alley, for some reason or other, I want you to be able to get to a main street and know where you are. So it's kind of my introduction to clandestine activities in the United States military. And I wrote the operations plan for collection in Cambodia. I debriefed a double agent, eventually murdered after I left country. He had been the chief, his mother had been the chief housekeeper for the Prince Sihanouk, the head guy in Cambodia, the palace. His mother was the head housekeeper. His best friend was Sihanouk's son, he said. He'd been an officer, and we got what's called operational intelligence on him. I spent a month debriefing the guy on tactical intelligence coming out of Cambodia. He never knew what my name was or anything, but I'd rent a hotel room downtown Saigon, different hotel room for each of the meetings, and turn the radio on, make sure nobody was in the room next door to overhear the conversation, and found out he'd been a student at Patrice Lumumba University, which is the school for revolutionaries in Moscow. The Russians would bring people from all over the world, young people that were smart, to be trained to go back and run wars of national liberation all over the world. So he had been there. He spoke 7 languages. So this was a sharp guy. So my commanding officer, after I did about a month of interviews, he says, I'm taking over. So all I assumed was they're going to try to get strategic intelligence out of him. So I never saw him again. But he was murdered reputedly by American Green Beret captain who was a replacement in my unit after I left country after my wounds. Front page of New York Times, naming the operation that I named for us to go into Cambodia and so forth with our agents. Although we had 6 special forces camps along the border where we had the mission of getting intelligence out of Cambodia, where all the North Vietnamese communists would come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and they had a privileged sanctuary, kind of like Waziristan in Pakistan the last few years, next to Afghanistan, and they would attack us and go back across the border, and Sihanouk didn't do anything about it. So then my second assignment was to live in safe houses in Saigon and upcountry with young Cambodian anti-communists, and live with them 24/7, train them in observation techniques and marksmanship, and we got them sanitized uniforms and weapons. And I dropped them in helicopter infiltration along the border twice. They were not successful because it was triple canopy jungle in the area. They couldn't go anywhere, so I had to pick them up quick. But I spent 3 months doing that. And then my last tour where I was wounded was 3 months up in a specific Special Forces camp where I wore infantry brass and had a false name named Copley. Alan Copley was my nom de guerre, as we call it, in intelligence operations. I was at that camp when I was wounded.
How long into your deployment were you?
I was in the 11th month of a 12-month tour, and actually I was leaving the morning of the attack at 9:30 with this North Vietnamese regular Army battalion infiltrating our area, having ambushed Special Forces patrol, killing 2 out of 3 Americans, and then the relief group going in to retrieve our bodies. Possibly all 4 of the Americans in the Mike Force were killed. My combat medic that saved my life, Jimmy Hill, believes that all 4 of them were killed also. So they were intent on taking our camp. And so my commanding officer in Saigon says, Alan, I'm picking you up at 9:30. I'm taking a plane up, picking you up. Get ready to move out at 9:30 from your camp. He says, I don't want you captured. I don't want you to be in the camp if it's overrun. So I kind of liked that. My operation was closed down anyway. Too many enemies up in the jungle area. He said, I'm picking you up 9:30. So at 4:30, I was the Special Forces American on duty during the 2-hour shift from 4 to 6, when the NVA battalion had come in, set up rockets and mortar positions across the river from our camp and attacked us. And so I was in the middle of getting counter battery, yelling out to the mortar positions in the camp to fire, to put the rounds in the flares, because we were expecting a ground attack. Put the flares up in the air, the direction we knew they were coming from, and trying to spot the position so we could put counter battery. When I got around, hit me, the left rear, about 18 inches. Took my left leg off, totally below the knee. There was nothing left. The right leg I kept for 10 days. It was broken in 5 places. The doctor said, you'll walk better with 2 artificial legs than you'll walk with 1 artificial leg and a real gimp leg. So I took his advice.
Thank you for sharing that. It's the first time I've actually heard that.
But I lived. Man, I lived. The good Lord let me live to come back and be the father to 2 wonderful daughters and a marriage, unfortunately, that was terminated, but I have a wonderful wife today. We're in the 15th year of our marriage. Linda Frost Clark is a jewel and a treasure in my life, or the latter years of my life, to share these years with me. Linda's a joy.
You've gotten out and you've done so much for so many. Tell me why, after getting out of the service, you chose to continue to help the veteran cause, support our country.
Well, my own issues with post-traumatic stress disorder were very, very severe. I was in the hospital 15 months, 12 operations right after the war, before I left to come to SMU for an MBA. And in the 8th month of my hospitalization, I cratered. I went 4 days without sleep, and I cracked emotionally. And so I had a breakdown, and I was in a closed psychiatric ward for 14 weeks. And I took pills and psychiatrists for 8 years. But I got my faith act together as a Christian, and went to a couples Bible study and began to study on my own, and had a wonderful, wonderful pastor at Fellowship Bible, Gene Getz. And I learned from him, and I don't know, in the middle 70s, more than 40 years ago, I just kind of said, look, I'm sick of this stuff. I'm not going to let these demons get to me. So I want to get my act together, and I just got off the pills, got off the psychiatrist, went on with my life. So because of what's happened to me and how I've healed by the grace of God, I've just felt that I had to continue to work with especially younger veterans. I mean, for a while there, before Desert Storm and so forth, and the sandbox wars, as I call it, Iraq and Afghanistan, that I wanted to tell them my story so that for whatever purposes it might serve for them to know there is hope. But my hope is through my Christian faith to be healed from my horrendous wounds. So I meet with a lot of younger veterans, and I tell them my story and ask for their story, and I take a spiritual approach. And I have a website, www.combatfaith.com, which has anecdotes from all the wars and the spiritual approach to healing from those anecdotes of issues from the wars.
Tell me about being awarded the Silver Star. Who awarded you that?
That was an interesting story. I guess I was in the hospital maybe, and all of a sudden, maybe I was out of the hospital. My DD-214 indicated I had a Bronze Star Medal for valor, but I had no citation, and so I never wore the Bronze Star Medal for valor because I didn't have the citation. I didn't feel it was appropriate. And my father worked in the JAG office at Fort Bliss. His commanding officer there was a full colonel that my dad told the story about what had happened to me, and that I was apparently awarded a Bronze Star for valor because of trying to direct counter battery fire and get flares up in the air and so forth, and working the mortar pits out in the open when the attack started. So my father just told the story to his full colonel, who moved up to Fort Bragg and was next door neighbor with the full colonel that had been the commanding officer of Special Forces in Vietnam when I was there. So he decides to take up my cause. He writes a letter to the then Special Forces colonel commanding in Vietnam, and they upgraded it to a Silver Star. So, I get a phone call one day. I'm in graduate school at SMU, almost graduating, and I get a call from the Pentagon. Says, we have a Silver Star for you, kind of like the fellow I was talking about. Says, where do you want it awarded? I says, well, I don't know. Only one I could think about was a Southwest Division engineer, Major General Parfit, who had ended up eventually being governor of Panama Canal Zone. And so I had the presentation down there. Only 3 officers in the room, rest were civilians. He said, Alan, your Silver Star deserves a much broader audience than a civilian office. I said, well, it doesn't matter. But my first wife was so beset with what I call spousal PTSD. She didn't even go to the ceremony. She told me later years that she wished she had, but she didn't even go with me to the ceremony. She was so sad because of what happened to me and what she had to go through as a spouse, you know. But I'm proud to wear it, obviously.
Absolutely. Hey, going from no citation to a Silver Star, absolutely merited, but that's great. I'm glad that somebody actually, you know, your father and everybody listened, paid attention and did that, because that doesn't always happen. That's huge.
Well, one of those amazing things, you know, and you know, I wear it believing and feeling that it's unmerited compared to what other people do valiantly on the battlefield. But I have it, it's documented, I have a citation, it's on a correction of military records that I got in 1990 or so. And so I wear it proudly, and you know, it gives me some credibility with people.
I think that everybody who has honor and integrity feels that same way.
Yeah.
About medals like that. Mm-hmm. Good thing for me is I only got a National Defense ribbon, so you know what I mean?
I know you deserve. We've talked about that.
National Defense.
Well, I've talked about that, and I'm going to put you in for, you ever get that written up and you get a buddy report, I'm going to put you in for that. Keep that in mind.
We will always do things together, but we're good. Life in the service. Okay. Was there someone special or something special you did for good luck?
For what?
For good luck.
Oh no, I was never superstitious. No. Oh
okay.
no. No, it's non-issue with me.
How do people entertain themselves during your era?
Yeah, as a junior officer at Fort Hood, I mean, we had a lot of battalion parties. You know, we have a party once a month to have welcome in new assignee officers or farewell to those officers that left. You know, I was battalion athletics and recreation officer. My battalion was in last place, about 22 battalions. When I finished it ended up being about 4th in the division. So I had fun. I'd go play every sport. If they didn't have somebody to play the sport, I played it. I wasn't especially an athlete, but I was athletic. And so if one of my teams missing somebody, I would go to the event and spend a lot of time doing that. And there's Fort Hood, which is armor battalion. I was in a combat engineer battalion, and you know, our job is to lay minefields and in Germany set atomic demolition munitions in the valleys and mountain ranges if the Russians ever attacked. That was our plan in the 60s. And build bridges. Big thing we did was build bridges, pontoon bridges. It was our big mission. You know, just getting up every morning, you know, get in for 6:30 in the morning, you know, you work 10 or 12 hours a day as a junior officer in a battalion.
That's the good times, though. Those are great times. Okay, one of my favorite questions. What were some of the pranks that you would pull on each other?
We were all serious. I don't remember pulling any pranks on anybody. The only thing I do remember that I didn't do, but one of my roommates, when I was a cadet, you know, Castro had overtaken Cuba. So one of my roommates got another cadet in my company, who eventually became my roommate, on a list for a Cuban girl to write him. So here he starts to get letters from a denied country, you know, and I don't know if he had any problem with counterintelligence contacting him, But that's, I guess, the funniest thing. Another one, I was so young as a cadet, and I just studied, and we all play sports. I was a debater the last 2 years of school, and I had a great time being a debater on the West Point team. Went to a lot of schools on the East Coast and met a lot of cute timekeepers. And took them out that night.
Do you recall the day your service ended?
Well, it was the day I was released, I guess, after 5 years, retired. But I'd left. It was in September '68, and I mean, it was just a nothing day. It was just an anniversary, because I came back and left the hospital about August and moved to a rental home here near SMU, about a mile from SMU, and started my classes. Took 6 credit hours first semester, 9, and then 12 and 12 to get an MBA, get myself, prepared for civilian life, which was very, very boring. My first job was with Ross Perot. I was hired as his personal financial assistant, and I had a great job lined up for me. He sent me on an audit up to Wall Street to decide whether he wanted to buy Francis I. DuPont, which was a brokerage firm up there. And I pushed myself, and I had another mini breakdown, which required coming back and being in the hospital for a week and getting back on heavy medication again. And I couldn't work. I was just, this is only 3 years after my wounding, and I couldn't work. My psychiatrist said, I don't want you getting a pressure job after you get out of the hospital for several years, because you're going to be susceptible to another breakdown. So what do? I go to work for Ross Perot, who's the entrepreneur of the years around that time. And he hired me as his personal financial assistant. And so I had to have an exit interview with him. And he was so good and kind, and he is to all of us, and has supported so many veterans. He said, Alan, I will hold this job for you for a year. So if you feel comfortable a year from now, up to a year from now, coming back to this job, you can have it. But I never felt strong enough emotionally again during that year. So I stayed in banking for about 8 years and got involved as eventually hired by the governor of Texas, Bill Clements, to be a special assistant for administration. Went to Austin, and then George H.W. Bush administration for 2 senatorial confirmed positions.
Tell me about your friends in service that you keep in contact still, the Brotherhood.
Yeah, well, I've kept in touch with the medic that saved my life, Jimmy Hill. And then as Captain Cottingham, physician, we're still in contact. And as he indicated, for 35 years, he remembered me, but didn't know how to get hold of me, because all he knew me by was my false name. And I told him my real name one time, but he forgot it, so he couldn't. He finally found me through a Special Forces connection. I had 4 other captains in my B-57 unit. The fellow from Mississippi, Las Vegas, Washington, D.C., and Bernie, Texas. We were all very close as captains. Intelligence branch. 3 of us were intelligence branch, 2 were infantry, detailed to my collection operation against Cambodia. The 5 of us have kept up. In fact, I contacted all 4 about submitting any recollections, and I've seen them all I've seen all 4 in the last 10 years, and probably 3 in the last 5 years. So we've kept in touch. We were very close, because being in an intelligence operation, we didn't have any connections with the regular military. We were in our own building in Saigon and Cholan, and on our operation, we come into town to get more money to pay our agents and we didn't go to the big clubs or anything. It was a very lonely time for us in our assignments because we're at these isolated posts along the border, Special Forces camp.
Okay. Well, as this will be on the camera and it'll be playing on the screen the day of the film festival luncheon, what would you want all the viewers, all the people that are in the audience to know about veterans and about what still needs attention?
I think the final thing is that everybody that's been in the military and been in tough situations, come under fire, combat situations, all of us will come back for a certain degree of post-traumatic stress because all of us have different demons that impacted us. The issue is whether it becomes a D, which has been known as a disorder or dysfunction in the past. So we have to forestall or get out of the D with our post-traumatic stress. We all are going to have a certain issue forever probably with post-traumatic stress issues, but we don't want to be dysfunctional. We want to get back into life, have a family that's taken care of by us because we're back and mature and stable, take care of our family, make a new life for ourselves. And the only way that I think that can happen is the way it happened with me, is you got to get into your faith. My faith is Christianity. If I had not had Jesus in my life, in my Christian faith, I would not be who I am today for whatever that is. And I wouldn't have had the experiences I've had and the opportunity to live and have the life that I've had. That's the bottom line. So I urge anybody with post-traumatic stress, with the D, especially to get into their Christian faith. Find a good church, study your Bible. That's the solution.
If you're asked to do it all over again, would you?
Oh, of course.